After an incredibly disappointing season for the Dallas Mavericks in which they went to the conference finals the year prior to now missing the play-in entirely this season, and this of course after making a blockbuster trade for Kyrie Irving in which they gave up an unprotected first-round pick, Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith, which somehow effectively made their team worse. Well, I think most of us knew that was a train wreck waiting to happen, everyone except for the Mavs front office, but give them credit, they knew they needed to make a big move to keep Luka happy, but it backfired. And now for the Mavs, who have one of the greatest players in the world who is just about to enter his prime, a star also in Kyrie Irving, but an aging star who has had his own issues off the court as well as injuries, and you look around at the rest of the roster, and there isn't much to get excited about. In fact, they have a lot of bad contracts on their books for the foreseeable future. But the one good thing the Mavs did do, which they got fined $750,000 for doing in the final 2 games of the season, despite still having a shot at the final play-in spot, they said, nah, even if we do make the play-in, we're not going to be making any noise, and instead we're going to lose these final 2 games because, wouldn't you know it, the Mavs' first-round pick for the 2023 draft they had traded to the Knicks in the Porzingis deal, but that pick was top 10 protected. And by the Mavs losing their final 2 games, they would secure finishing with the 10th worst record in the NBA, which would give them the highest odds to land the 10th pick in the draft, about an 80% chance of keeping their pick. And wouldn't you know it, they landed the 10th pick in the draft, enabling them to keep their pick rather than shipping it off to New York. It will still convey to New York eventually, but not this year. And so with everything going on with the Mavericks, their struggles over this past season, the fact that they have to do something, everything in their power, to keep their young superstar Luka Doncic happy so he doesn't eventually demand a trade, and by the Mavs actually securing the 10th pick in a stacked draft class, this opens up an opportunity for them that wouldn't have otherwise been there. And no, it does not mean using the pick to make a selection, but rather trading the pick, packaging it in a deal to get Luka some help, and it's what we'll be talking about in this video. If you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, when we say the Mavericks and their overall future outlook being bleak, aside from having one of the greatest talents in the game, it's not an exaggeration. Obviously, Kyrie Irving is set to become an unrestricted free agent if they don't reach an agreement on an extension before July 1st. Would they really let him walk for nothing after trading away assets to get him for a half year? They still have Tim Hardaway Jr. under contract for the next 2 seasons, which I consider to be a bad contract when you compare it to Hardaway's overall production and efficiency and the fact that he's 31 and making close to $20 million. They still have Bertans under contract for the next 2 seasons, which was a disaster of a deal that the Wizards gave him coming off an excellent shooting year, which he then quickly fell off thereafter and is barely playable at this point. He's going to be making $17 million next season, also 30 years old. They signed Maxi Kleber to a long-term contract, which is somewhat of a team-friendly deal now, but Kleber is already 31 years old and is showing some signs of decline. You're going to be paying him $11 million for the next 3 years until he's 34. They gave that awful contract to JaVale McGee, 3 years, $17 million for a guy who was 35, fully guaranteed, no team options or partial guarantees, and McGee has barely played. They have to decide what they're going to do with Dwight Powell and Christian Wood, both free agents, both bigs on a roster that already has too many bigs. Their direction, their strategy is unclear to say the least, and it would be one thing if it was just a team trying to figure out what to do in landing their next big superstar. But they already have their big superstar, and he's only 24 years old, and you have a directionless approach to the franchise and building around him. Well, in comes the 10th pick. Now, I know most people will say, well, it's just the 10th pick, which is nice, always great to have a top 10 pick in the draft, but this draft class is different. Any team that has a top 10 pick in this year's draft is going to be getting a solid player in return and a potential future all-star. And because of that fact, there were a lot of teams that disappointed this year or crashed in the playoffs or in need of pivoting and going in another direction. Teams like the Chicago Bulls or the Raptors, Hawks, or even the Grizzlies, Pelicans, hell, even teams like the Sixers, where you could actually get a player for a team looking to go on a fire sale and wanting to acquire draft capital. And for the Mavs, while even though Luka is young, they still have time to get this right. It's not like his window is closing compared to a star like Damian Lillard, who is about to be 33. But despite that, they are under the clock in terms of Luka becoming more disgruntled and wanting out. They have to make the right moves now, especially after the Kyrie Irving trade blew up in their faces. So what would a trade package look like for the Mavs by including the 10th pick? Well, there are a few options that I think could work for both sides, and then I would love to hear your trade ideas as well in the comments. The first is with my Chicago Bulls. You know, I have to start with the Bulls because we have to figure out a way to fix this team. And a trade would look something like this. Zach LaVine, because it has been rumored in the past that the Mavs are interested in LaVine. Zach LaVine to the Mavericks in exchange of a sign and trade of Christian Wood, Reggie Bullock, Josh Green, the number 10 pick, as well as their first round pick in 2027 unprotected. And probably a second round pick in there as well. Might seem like a lot to give up if you're the Mavs, but we're talking about an elite scorer in LaVine who is in his prime and under contract for the next 4 years and is capable of playing well off the ball in the catch and shoot. For the Bulls, this gives them a more versatile big who can play the 4 or 5, can give you some additional scoring and rebounding with Christian Wood. Reggie Bullock is more in there for salary filler, but a decent player and can actually provide outside shooting, which the Bulls absolutely need. His deal would be expiring anyway, so it would free up cap space by getting LaVine's long-term contract off the books. And I know you're still giving up Zach LaVine, who has been with the team for a while and a star player, but you're also getting a young guy in Josh Green, only 22, former first-round pick, and has shown a lot of progress since his rookie season. And you're still getting 2 first-round picks, one of which we know is a top 10 pick for this year's draft. And of course, for the Mavs, this gives them another star to put next to Luka. Obviously, the fit here is going to be pretty dependent on whether Kyrie re-signs, because now you're talking about 3 heavy volume scorers who don't play defense. Not the most ideal. I could also see a world in which the Mavs would work on a sign and trade with the Bulls for Vucevic. Mark Cuban does love his international bigs, even though Vuce played his senior year and college ball in the States. And I think Vucevic's IQ, his rebounding, which the Mavs need as they were one of the worst rebounding teams in the NBA last year, I think him and Luka would be a great fit together in the pick and roll and pick and pop. And at Vucevic's age, though, might be a tough sell to get the number 10 pick in that deal. Bulls would likely have to take on one of the bad contracts, probably for Davis Bertans. Another trade I like for the Mavs is actually trading for Pascal Siakam. It gives them some needed defense, size, versatility on offense as well, outside of just Luka and Kyrie. Trade would go something like this. Mavs get Siakam while the Raptors would get the 10th pick, the 2027 first round pick, and they're also going to need to take on some bad contracts to make the money work. In this instance, we're going to include Tim Hardaway Jr., which isn't a bad pickup for the Raptors considering they need more guards, and Bullock would also be included in the deal, again, for salary filler. OG Anunoby actually would be another interesting piece for the Mavericks if he's on the trading block, as again, the Mavs need defenders. OG is a great two-way player and is young and in his prime. Obviously, you would not be able to include Pascal and OG together because that is a massive haul for the Raptors. They would expect much more in return than the package that I just listed. And then finally, the last trade I like for the Mavs when it comes to packaging the number 10 pick. And this one is going to sound a little crazy, but trading for Zion Williamson. This is obviously a huge risk on their side given Zion's injury history and the fact that he can barely stay on the court. And while I think the Pelicans are going to continue to hold out hope that he will eventually get healthy, something tells me their front office is going to start looking at alternatives and cutting their losses with Zion, because the Pelicans actually have a decent team. They've got talent. Ingram, CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas has been very nice for them. They've got some young talented players like Herb Jones, Dyson Daniels, Trey Murphy. Not saying it's a contending team, but it's a solid team. And I could see a world in which the Pelicans say, we should look to move Zion now before his trade value gets very low. It's already low because of the injury concerns, but if the Pelicans go into training camp and it's still looking like Zion isn't ready to go, yeah, his trade value is going to tank even further. But for the Mavericks, high risk, high reward scenario, while also being able to buy low on what was once a generational level prospect that so many teams were tanking for. And as much as it's easy to be out on Zion because he's barely played in his short career, he is still only 22 and could very well recover and keep getting better and show up into that superstar that we all thought he would be. A healthy Zion and Luka together, young, very skilled, can complement each other with their strengths. That duo would be nasty for years to come. And because Zion's trade value is low, you really shouldn't have to give up that much. Obviously, the 10th pick in this year's draft, you're likely going to have to throw in a couple second-round picks. And because Zion signed a max contract extension to his rookie deal, which kicks in next season, you're going to have to find, again, salary filler. Tim Hardaway Jr. foots the bill. You could probably include Maxi Kleber to be a backup to Valanciunas. You might have to end up making it 2 first-round picks because the more I think about it, this probably isn't enough, even for a risky player like Zion. There would be likely teams that would offer more for Zion if the Pelicans do indeed look to ship him in the offseason. So if you add in that 2027 pick from the Mavericks, that likely would get the deal done. So yes, that one is a bit out there because it's Zion, and I think all teams are going to be wary of bringing in Zion if it means giving up 2 first-round picks for. But I also like this for the Mavericks for the reasons I just explained. Either way, though, the Mavericks have got to do something with the pick. They need to be focusing on improving their roster for the immediate term and not working on project players who are years away from competing. I would love to hear what you guys think would be good trade partners for the Mavs to explore with the 10th pick. Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.